Michael of the show, and today we've got Jason Falls on the show, and he's just published a brand new book, Winfluence. So how are you today, Jason?
I'm doing good, Michael. Thanks for having me on the show, man. It's exciting to talk to you.
Awesome. And so for the viewers at home, can you give a little bit of background information about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm a public relations guy by trade. I spent about 15 years doing public relations and media relations in college athletics, so university and sport athletics. About the time my son was born, I realized I was traveling too much. And so I got out of the college athletics world and got a job at an ad agency doing public relations and some digital strategy. And it just happened to be when social media was kind of exploding for brands in the mid 2000s. And so I had played on all these social networks and blogs and whatnot for so long that I just kind of naturally fell into a role kind of advising companies on how to use social media. One thing led to another. I was working with some regulated industries, so I started to get invited to speak at conferences, and then ended up writing a book and then a second book. And so I've been an agency strategist for the last 15 years or so, and focus a lot on social media, digital marketing, influence marketing, and do a little bit of SEO as well. So a lot of content for our clients at Cornet, and that's kind of where I spend my time.
So you're a keynote speaker as well as a podcast host. You published 2 books. And do you have a blog?
I do. I write pretty regularly for Entrepreneur Magazine on entrepreneur.com, but I blog at jasonfalls.com, which is where you can find all the links to the podcasts and things that I'm involved in as well. But I blog. I mostly the two of my blog posts each week are my podcast episodes of Winfluence, the influence marketing podcast. But I occasionally will jump in and offer some sort of thought leadership type papers on influence marketing or social media or some aspect of the digital space to just kind of give people my perspective on things.
So that's a hell of a lot of content that you're publishing and putting out there into the world. How do you manage to cope with that level of commitment?
Well, there's probably two reasons or 2 ways that I'm able to do it. First of all, I really love what I do, and I'm just kind of passionate about, sort of thinking through communications and marketing strategies for clients and looking at the industry and kind of understanding what the opportunities and the challenges are out there. So I think about it a lot. And the other thing is I'm just kind of tireless. I wake up in the morning, I work all day, and then I'll stop at dinner time and I'll have dinner. And if I don't have something going on with my kids or my girlfriend or something like that, I'll sit there and watch TV for a little bit, and then I'll get bored and be like, well, I'm just going to go write something. So I'm constantly thinking about the ideas and finding ways to communicate those, whether it's recording a podcast or interviewing someone about a topic or writing down my thoughts or writing a piece for entrepreneurs. So I'm just kind of tireless, and I never get bored with it. So I keep doing it.
That's awesome. So take me back to by trade. You said you were a public relations guy. So was you in the corporate world?
So I've been in the corporate world. After my career in sort of in university sport, I moved over into a mainstream advertising marketing PR firm at an agency. And then about 5 years into that, I went over and worked for Cafe Press, which is a large e-commerce internet retailer that does custom products. So I was on the corporate side of the aisle, on the brand side, for about 2.5 years. And really my whole time there was trying to help them solve some problems with their digital strategy and their community management. But it was really also for me kind of getting a master's degree in e-commerce. I was able to kind of really see how a big publicly traded online retailer works. And so it was a really good education for me as well. So they got something out of it, and I helped them put out some fires that they were having with their social media and community management. And then I got a lot of education out of working there as well. So I've been on both sides of the aisle.
Well, that's awesome. So your first book, what was your first book about?
My first book was called No Bullshit Social Media. It was basically a strategic planning guide for social media marketing. Back then in 2010 or 11, when that came out, there were a lot of books that talked about social media and how social media networks worked and things like that. But there really wasn't one that talked to business owners and brands about how you think about social media strategically. So Eric Deckers and I, he's my co-author for that book. We kind of sat down and said, look, we're building social media strategies for our clients. So let's translate that into something that will help people understand how to really set some goals for social media and plan accordingly so that you can actually get something out of it. Our book was one of the first that helped people move from social media is this kind of fad that people play with to I can actually leverage this and use it for business. And so I followed that one up about a year later with an email marketing book that I wrote with DJ Waldo called The Rebel's Guide to Email Marketing. And then waited quite some time before publishing my third, which is Winfluence, which is the one that just came out in the last month.
That's awesome. So the social media strategies that you taught from the first book, are they still relevant today?
Actually,
it's now a decade on now.
Yeah, they actually are, and that's kind of one of the smart things we did about that book. Because back then a lot of people were like, "Well, here's how you should use Clout, and here's how you should," they were talking about all these tools that just come and go. And we wrote that book to say, look, this is not about the tool or the platform. This is about here's what social media is, regardless of what channel you're talking about. Here's how consumers behave. This is what brought it about. And then here's how brands can connect with consumers on social channels. It could be blogs, it could be social networks, it could be microblogs, it could be lots of different things. And we didn't write it specific to, what was in the market at the time because we knew it would change. And so because it's really about strategy and not about tactics or execution, it still holds true today. We still sell probably 50, 75 copies of that book a month. Because it still holds true. It's really about, okay, how do you use social media, social networks to drive branding and awareness? How do you use it to drive sales? How do you use it to protect your reputation? So what we did with that book was we basically said, here are the things that social media can do. You've got to decide what you want it to do. And then here's how you build strategies for that. And it doesn't matter if it's Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, which Instagram and Snapchat didn't exist when we wrote that book. But it doesn't matter what channel you're talking about. What matters is the strategy that you're using to approach the communications.
That's. I just wanted to ask that because like you're saying, a decade. There's been a lot of change. Like Snapchat's come on the scene, Instagram grew. I think it was there when you started, but just not. It's still in its infancy. And now we've got the rise of other social media platforms like TikTok that's just boomed over the past 2 years massively. So I just wanted to ask you whether if them strategies apply to our social media network and not just the platform.
Yeah, the strategies do because it's really about driving business. And if you think about it from that high level perspective, all social media networks are the same. What's really the key is, can you create really compelling content that attracts people to your channel? And can you engage those people in conversation around that content? And if you can do those two things, then you're going to be able to at least capture the audience and capture their attention. Now, once you have their attention, the next level up on the strategy is, okay, well, how can I divert them to my website? How can I capture their email information? How can I move them along the marketing funnel so that they can become customers? So, the performance of creating great content and engagement is step one. Being really strategic and business oriented about it is kind of the next level.
So you just mentioned marketing funnel then. Now that's a term that's been highly popularized by Russell Brunson, everybody knows. But was marketing funnels a thing before Russell Brunson came on the scene and popularized it?
Well, sure it was. It's all of this has been around, forever. It's just putting a different label, a different name on it. Yeah. When you think about, influence marketing, I mean, before social media exists, I was a public relations guy, And I was an influence marketer because what I was doing was I was trying to leverage a trusted third party to communicate to their audience about my product or service, right? So all of these things philosophically have been around forever. It's just a matter of putting a new label on it because it's on the internet, makes it kind of fun and, bells and whistly, kind of shiny new object. But it's really the same thing. It's really about just communication skills.
And that's beautiful. It's really just about communication skills. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I had to point that out there. That was a good sentence, because that's what marketing and branding is really all about, isn't it? It's about how you communicate and put yourself out there in the world.
It is. It is. I think branding is basically how you label yourself, how you represent yourself. And I think marketing is how you communicate that to your potential audience. And sometimes now you have to remember, when you communicate, there's the one way communication to your audience, but there's also the how do they perceive that communication and their feedback. So marketing kind of makes it a full circle. So branding is what you say you are, what you want to be, and marketing is actually the combination of what you want to be versus what the market says you are. And so understanding how those work together and how you can push levers to, persuade or manipulate that equation so that ultimately your audience, what the audience thinks about you and what you think about you match up. That's where you get, sort of really good. I hate to use the word synergy because it's overused, but you get a really good synergy between the two, and you're able to be more successful.
There's a lot of words and phrases that are very overused, but are just right for the sentence or the phrase that you're trying to put out there. And there's just no way of getting around it, unfortunately. Your brand is very edgy. As you said, like the first book was called No Bullshit Social Media Marketing. Is that where you were?
Yep, that's right.
This one, okay, if it had a little bit of a different design, it could be perceived as a little bit more professional. But your general brand in a whole is a little bit edgy. How do you think that plays out for you? Do you think that represents you as a person completely?
Yeah, it does. And it's kind of by design. When Eric and I first started talking about writing that book, I said, look, I'll do this book project with you, but we have to call it No Bullshit Social Media. That's what I want to call it, because that's sort of my attitude. My attitude is always, let's strip away all the hype. Let's strip away all the nonsense, all the BS. And let's get right down to business and say, look, this is absolutely something that your business should be doing and should be using. And here's how to do it right without getting lost in all the, the buzz and the hype around it. Because in fact, the subtitle of the book was The All Business No Hype Guide to Social Media Marketing. Because back then in 2010, 2011, there was a lot of hype around social media and how, oh, look, you can, if you get your content to go, on the first page of dig.com, you'll get all this traffic. And if you get a bunch of followers on Twitter, you'll be able to motivate them to do this. And there was all this hype, but nobody was saying, well, okay, but what does all that mean to connecting audiences to an idea or a call to action that will actually drive revenue or move your business? And so my sort of attitude has always been, I've always been really good at A, sniffing out the BS, and B, distilling down what we need to really understand about something. I've had people, come to me before and say, I just don't understand search engine optimization. And I'm like, look, you don't have to understand a whole lot about SEO. You don't have to listen to all the buzzwords. Here's what SEO is. It's making sure that the content on the page tells the search engines, as well as the people visiting the page, what the page is about. And if you want it to win traffic for a certain keyword, then you optimize all the content on that page around that keyword. It's not really any more complicated than that. Now, there's lots of little technical bells and whistles that you can learn along the way to make that happen faster or better or bigger. But ultimately, what it gets down to is Google is trying, and all the other search engines are trying to deliver the best result for whatever query you're putting into the browser. And so if you say, how do I taste bourbon? Well, the page that you're delivered as the number one result, their job as a search engine is to deliver a result that you click on and read and like and solve your problem or answer your question. And so your job in building pages on your website is to say, okay, what keyword or keyword phrase should this page win? And if it should win that, then let's make sure that all the content on this page feeds that keyword. So it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be hard. And so I've always had that sort of approach and that attitude toward everything, marketing, sales, etc. Let's strip away all the BS and let's get right to it. And so that sort of edginess about my brand combined with an irreverent sense of humor, that's just kind of who I am. In fact, Winfluence, Reframing Influencer Marketing to Ignite Your Brand, was the second title that I suggested for the book. The first title was very edgy and probably would have been a really good attention getter, but I ultimately decided, the publisher had nothing to do with the decision. I ultimately said, you know what? I want this book to be taken a little bit more seriously. I don't want it to be distracted by a clever title. I want to really focus on influence marketing. So let's keep it with Winfluence, Reframing Influencer Marketing to Ignite Your Brand. But the other title was really kind of, it was edgier than No Bullshit Social Media. Let's just put it that way.
And you don't want to actually diverge and tell us what.
Oh, I'll tell you what it was. I mean, ultimately, the book is saying, it ultimately says influencers with an R are kind of like the Kardashians. They're the peace sign, duck lips, very superficial. There's not a whole lot of substance to their content. Influence marketing, if you look at it in a much more broad perspective, you're talking about using it strategically and actually persuading your audience to do something. So the suggested title of the book was "Fuck the Kardashians," but we didn't use that.
I'm not surprised you didn't do that and use that. Might have ended up with a lawsuit on your hands.
I'm not sure if we'd have gotten sued, but we certainly would have gotten some attention. My whole goal as a joke was going to be, I just want, if I have a book called F the Kardashians, then my ultimate goal is to have Kanye West tweet, "Fuck Jason Falls." That would have been like, I'd have retired at that point. It'd been great.
That'd have been it. Game over. Love it. So, reignite your brand with influencer marketing. How does a company go about doing that?
So basically it kind of, goes through that, what I just kind of explained about the word influencer versus influence, right? You have, if you look at it as influencer marketing with an R, you're really focused on the person, you're focused on the individual, and you're probably sort of predestined to think of it in terms of Instagram and YouTube. You're not necessarily thinking of all the different other, great, wonderful, powerful, influential people that you can use either online and also offline. So I think the term influencer backs us into a corner and makes us think of things that are happening on the internet. When you look at it in terms of influence marketing and focus on the verb, on the goal of what you're trying to accomplish, now you start to ask yourself different questions and you look at it very differently. You say, okay, if my goal is to influence an audience to take action, what people, what organizations, what channels influence them? And it might be that it's a YouTuber or an Instagrammer, but it might also be, if you're a local business and your focused, audience is parents, then the president of the local PTA might be your most influential person. And that doesn't have anything to do with YouTube or Instagram or influencer marketing tools. You've got to find a way to bridge a relationship with that individual and give them the appropriate, motivation and assets and content so that they can ultimately deliver that message for you to their audience. So when you look at it as influence marketing rather than influencer marketing, now all of a sudden you're thinking about it strategically and you're opening up the possibilities, the horizons to do lots of different things. So influence marketing, or winfluencing, to use a clever little, catchphrase, is actually focusing on the goal, focusing on results, focusing on strategy, and not focusing on the person on Instagram who is living their best life.
So what you've basically done there is flip the script again on what we now perceive as influencer marketing, and brought it back down to its core values of what influencer marketing actually is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really goes back to the mainstream media when they cover influencers, they typically talk about the worst behavior that is out there. So I like to say that they talk about the best practices of the worst behaviors. And so they're talking about people who are buying their followers. They're talking about people who are airbrushing clouds in their photoshopping clouds in their images on Instagram. They like to make fun of influencers as superficial and not effective. I work with influencers online and offline every single day for my clients. And I know that the 80 to 90% of the world of online content creators and influencers are incredibly effective for the businesses and brands that they work with because they have a concentrated audience of people who trust them. And if I can connect my businesses, my brands, my clients through someone who is trusted, their audience trusts them, and they can sort of allow us to borrow that trust a little bit with that audience, I'm going to have a much more efficient and effective way to motivate people to try or buy or think about a product differently than I would, to go. It'd be more efficient than going and buying advertisements to do that. And so I know influence marketing to be very successful and very very advantageous for businesses. But when you read the headlines, whether it's in the Evening Standard or whether it's in the the New York Times or whether it's in uh, you know uh, Business Insider or whatever about influencers, you're typically seeing a negative portrayal of them. So this book says, look, this is why influencer has become a bad word and has become something that has tainted the way we look at this practice. What I want to do is pull us all back and say, let's call it influence marketing so we look at it differently. And then here's what that means.
That's awesome. Would you consider yourself to be an influencer?
I am. And I don't say that arrogantly. I say that because I have businesses and brands who reach out to me to say, hey, you've got an audience, a concentrated audience of business owners, business marketers, brand marketers, and people at agencies that serve them. And we're let's say a software company that wants to, market our product to that audience. So I have a very small sphere of influence compared to a Kardashian or, someone who's got a bazillion followers on Instagram or YouTube. My audience is much smaller but it's much more concentrated. So if you want to talk to people who work at advertising agencies, or you want to talk to people who are marketers that are interested in digital marketing and influence marketing and stuff like that, if you sell software that serves those verticals, I'm a pretty influential person for you amongst that group. So I have people who sponsor my podcast. I have, companies who partner with me for content. And so I play that role in the B2B marketing space. And then I play the role of I've got to go hire influencers for the clients of Cornet for those different verticals. And every now and then, I even am called upon to sort of be an industry analyst, a third party, to look at the software landscape out there and say, well, here's the companies that are accelerating growth and doing good things, and here's the companies that have some challenges ahead of them and whatnot. So I look at influence marketing, the industry, and the practice from a couple of different perspectives, which also gives me an interesting perspective for things like the podcast and for writing a book. That's
awesome. How long did it take you to write this book?
The writing itself, once I got motivated to write again, which there was 8 years between book 2 and book 3. And so I was busy working on client stuff and didn't really have the motivation to do it. But once I really got excited about writing about something again and sat down to start researching it, it took me about probably 6 months to write the book. But because of the timing of negotiating with Entrepreneur Press, my publisher, I actually didn't get in the Q3 of 2020 publishing cycle. I had to wait till Q1 actually of 2021 to get it. So I wrote the book in about 6 months, and then I waited for about 9 months for it to come out. So it was just kind of sitting around. There's an editing process and whatnot there too, but it should have been published about 6 months prior to than it was, based on how long it took me to write it. But the publishing world moves kind of slow, so I was able to get it in to be published in February of this year.
So, where can people go buy it? So, it's available on Amazon. I know that. It's also available through this website that's displayed on the screen, which is jason.online/buy Winfluence.
Yep.
There's a link in the description below, but is it available anywhere else?
It's available almost everywhere online and in bookstores everywhere. As far as what I've been told is it's in Barnes and Nobles and Books A Million in the US. And I'm sure, the larger book retailers in the United Kingdom and Europe as well. I think the European edition just came out in the last couple of weeks. It lags behind the US a little bit for some reason, but I've seen people from the UK with their pictures of their books. So that's good. And then also, I believe this is globally. There might be a delay in other countries, but on Tuesday, on April 6th, the audiobook comes out on Audible and other audio formats, and I got to narrate the book. So that was a fun process. And so the audiobook should be out this week as well.
That's awesome. Is there anything else you would like to add to the show?
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about influence marketing. And I think, the points that we've made here, I think are important. If there's businesses or brands out there that are thinking about influencers and or have, a preconceived notion of what influencers really are, I hope you understand and know, and will take the opportunity to either read the book or do a little bit more homework to know that there's literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people out there who have influence online and offline. And finding ways to leverage their trust with the audience that they serve on behalf of your business or brand is a very effective and efficient way to spend your marketing dollars and your marketing time. I love the practice. I love advocating for the practice. I love the fact that there's an industry of people out there allowing folks like myself, like Michael, like, other people out there in the world who are creating content online to be able to monetize that in interesting ways. And so I think it's going to continue to grow as an effective way to reach your audience. And so I hope you give influence marketing, a good piece of your time and thought and consideration.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. There's probably a million other avenues we could have gone down because you're well versed in the space. And like I said, I hope the viewers have got some enjoyment out of it, and I hope the listeners on the podcast have got some enjoyment out of it too. So just one final question: how would you like to be remembered?
Whew, wow, that's a good one. Wow, that's a good question. I think from a professional standard perspective, I think I'd just like to be remembered as someone who was helpful, someone who was useful in sharing ideas. But I think ultimately the judge of how I'm going to be remembered are my kids going to be good people? And so I've got a son and a daughter who are teenagers, and I hope that they have a positive impact on the world. If that happens, then I'll be good with how I'm remembered.
That's awesome. Well, guys, that's it for today's show. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening on the podcast. And I will see you on the next one. See you later. See you, Jason.
See ya.